Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Boston Women's Film Festival. And today we're here with Katsitsionni Fox, who has directed Without a Whisper. And we're also here with Joanne Graziano, who's kind of the head of the festival, who's kind of imagined so much of this, and her amazing assistant, Sarah, who takes care of us. And we're going to have a discussion and a conversation today about both the films, Without a Whisper and also Sisters Rising. Although before we get started, I would, since today is Indigenous Peoples Day and we have Indigenous people here, and we're going to be talking about Indigenous film, I wanted to first kind of take a moment to have some acknowledgements. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. A lot of people may not know what that is, but we're just kind of calling awareness to the native land that we are actually on. And right now we have this interesting opportunity to be in a bunch of different places at one time. So I'm going to just acknowledge a number of groups of people in the land that we're sitting on right now. And then we'll go from there. So if you all just, my name is Elise and I'm from the Cherokee Nation. I don't speak all the languages of all the nations I'll mention, so you'll have to forgive me if I mispronounce. We're also very different, but I would like to start with that. I want to acknowledge and pay respect to the people whose lands we are meeting upon today. For Boston, we'd like to pay respect to the Mashpee Wampanoag, the Aquinnah Wampanoag. For those in upstate New York, the Akwesasne Mohawk Nation, and the Haudenosaunee communities and peoples. For those in Washington Heights, Manhattan, where I am, the Lenape people. And for supporting from afar my own Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, we honor and respect the elders, history, stories of the many diverse Indigenous peoples connected to these lands. I also want to take a moment to honor the storytellers who have come before us. Indigenous people were the first storytellers on this continent, and we are indeed standing on their shoulders tonight. And then, of course, thank you, Joanne, and the Boston Women's Film Festival for actually taking the time and seeking out Native stories, which is just very, very important. And without further ado, I'm gonna introduce Katsitsionni. Hello.
Hi. So good.
Hi. OCO.
Yeah.
Is it all right if I speak a little bit about you and tell about you? I have this
Sure.
wonderful bio here. Okay, she is our special guest tonight. Katsitsionni is an artist, curator, filmmaker, and educator whose work draws inspiration from the Haudenosaunee culture and history while investigating contemporary social and environmental issues. She's a painter and a sculptor and is the owner of Two Row Productions. Katsitsionni has been making films since 2003 in the Mohawk territory of Akwesasne, where she resides. Her film Under the Husk follows the journey of two Mohawk girls as they take part in their traditional passage rites to becoming Mohawk women, and that received funding from the Vision Maker Media and was broadcast on many PBS stations. So she's got her work out there. She also received the Jane Glasgow Award for Emerging Filmmaker at the Imaginative Film Festival in 2016, as well as the Achievement in Documentary Filmmaking Awards at the LA Skins Fest in 2016, which I heard was crazy, wild, and amazing, and I wish I'd been there. She produced a series of 12 short segments for Rematriation, a Native American women's online multimedia magazine that is focused on healing and empowerment of Native women through the sharing of their stories and successes, which I really hope we talk some of that tonight. And then today, her latest documentary, Whisper, which we've seen during the festival, is an untold story of how Native American women helped to inspire the struggle of American women's suffrage movement in the United States. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Virtually. How are things up there with you? up
Oh, they're
there?
pretty busy. Like I'm back to school. I'm a teacher, so I'm back to teaching, and we're teaching hybrid. So I have a couple kids in class, and the rest come in on Zoom. And then my film is just coming out, so I've been pretty busy with film festivals, and it'll be on PBS in November.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you.
Did you have like an event or something there to kind of show the film? And did anybody see it up in your nation and any events there?
Well, since the film festival circuit has gone virtual, more people are able to see it.
Mhm.
Like when I premiered my last film, Imaginative, I had a busload of people from here go up there, but this time they didn't need to do that. They just were able to get on virtually and watch it. And we're planning on showing it at our school for our
Oh,
Native American Day celebrations in November.
that's great.
Yeah.
I've been very curious after I saw this film. One of the things that I thought about, um, just from kind of some of my own experience, was how you kind of decided, like your film is all of your films. I kind of like hung out on your Vimeo for a while, but all your films are so very intimate. Like you really bring us into the community. I was wondering how you kind of go about balancing, sharing your stories and sharing your community with also, kind of protecting everyone
Mhm.
too. And like,
Yeah.
do you run things by your elders? Like, how do you go about that with your storytelling?
I think the way that I'm doing filmmaking is like you said, it's very intimate. Like I could just continue telling stories just in my community. There's so much stuff happening here in Akwesasne. Um, with my last film, Under the Husk, that was my daughter and her best friend that were in the film. So when I was filming, I was like really careful on what I would film and what I would show because they were in ceremony. And but it is interesting to see it, when you're with somebody like me is filming it that knows everybody there, so they could just kind of act like themselves. They're not really conscious of the camera being around because it's just me holding the camera, and they trust me.
Mm,
So the same with this other one with Louise and Sally. They're both really, really good friends of mine, and I was able to tag along with them, and they don't really pay me much mind. I'm just they're filming with my little crew. So yeah, but I'm really careful on what I how I tell the story and what I
mhm.
use.
Um, I was how did this one come to you? You mentioned in another interview you did about how you're more of a conduit, how
Mhm.
the stories arrive. How did this one come to you? Where you just kind of hang out with Louise and it came to, or
Well,
how was that?
actually, I had heard Sally talk at a educational conference, a Haudenosaunee. We did this project called Teaching American History Through Haudenosaunee Eyes.
Mm.
It was like over 10 years ago, and we invited a bunch of different scholars and also our knowledge holders to talk to history teachers in New York State that had that were from contracting schools that had Native students. So we were trying to give them a different lens on how to teach more inclusive history. So Sally was one of the speakers there, and that's where I actually first heard this story about how the Haudenosaunee women influenced the
Oh
women's
wow.
rights movement was through her because she uncovered it in her research of Matilda Jocelyn Gage. So she did a lot of research on her, and she was trying to figure out where did she get, where did these ideas even come from, and she couldn't figure it out, and then she started to stumble across, all these different women, crossing paths with Haudenosaunee women. And then even the writings they did, like in the newspapers, and they were writing about our women. So that's where the idea started. And then I carried it around for a few years. And then after I finished Under the Husk, I dove into that story.
Wow. So you had a chance to really think about it for a while,
Yeah.
think about how you wanted to do it.
Yep.
So one of the conversations I have with a lot of different kinds of Native storytellers is how we tend to kind of layer a lot of things in and we don't even realize it,
Hmm.
until like someone who's coming from outside of our communities go, wow, you talked about this and you talked about this. And were you aware of that? Because you have so many things. I was like writing a list down. I was like, Wow. Okay. So we got like the Sky Woman, how we have that story next to kind of like the Adam and Eve story, have the voting rights, they have the boarding schools. Like there was so much. Did you have all that like in your mind before, or did it just kind of come in and layered it on
I
you?
actually had more in my mind that I wanted to put in there. And what's interesting is I have a co-producer, Katja Esson, who's German, and she also helped me on my last film. And what's unique about that, about having a German filmmaker co-producer, is that she has those outside eyes that can tell me, like you're putting too much in, or people aren't going to understand that, or because I'm just living this, and I'm trying to share things with people, and sometimes I'm too close to it. So it's good to have to have other eyes on it too.
Mhm.
Yeah, I did want to all those things that were in there. I purposefully put every single thing in there. And when you're doing a short documentary, like it's like every second, every little word, you're so picky about everything that goes in there.
Mhm. Do you ever feel like sometimes I feel like it's so rare that Native and uh, First Nations have the chance to kind of have the microphone to tell their stories? Do you feel like, do you feel kind of like that pressure when you're putting something together, like when it starts to go out, like you squeeze as much in as you can, or you want to make sure it's really, really right? Or do you ever kind of feel that pressure?
Yeah, yeah, like when especially this was like a more of a historical story, and I wanted to make sure that everything was accurate, and yeah, it was a lot. It took a lot to produce this film compared to my last film.
Mhm.
And then it had extra layers in it, like we had animation in this one, which is a whole new thing to
Yeah, tell us
do.
about that. How did you find the people to do that, and like what made you go there?
I knew I wanted to do it right away. Like early on, I knew I wanted to do animation because there are no photographs of us 500 years ago, and how are you going to show that? You could show it in pictures, but I wanted it to be alive. And I was able to loop in Marion Delaron. She's Mohawk from Ganawage,
Mm,
and she does animation, and she does all this language revitalization work, and she's so busy. So I was so happy to rein her in to do my animation, and she worked with another animator from Montreal, Alex Boya.
mm.
So the two of them worked together to do the animation.
That's great. I actually really loved it. And I kind of thought that myself. I was like, oh yeah, how would you tell Sky Woman? And how
Yeah,
would you even do that? I really loved it.
yeah.
How long did it take to do all the animation? Did it take a long time?
It took at least a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were meeting and like doing, I was telling them what I wanted to show and like what my thoughts are, and then they would do drawings and send them to me. And then there's the audio and all that other stuff that goes in there and corrections, and yeah, but I thought it was really important because I think for this story, like to understand why Haudenosaunee women had the equality that they had, like where did that come from? And it came from their creation story, right? Because it comes from us being a matrilineal society. Sky Woman was the one that was here first. Our
Hmm.
clans and our names, everything goes through the women. The women nominate the leaders. All of that comes from that. And then the same for the European women. Why didn't they have any rights? What was up with that? And it was because
Mm.
that they were kind of an afterthought in their creation story, and they were
Yeah.
there to serve the men, and they were property, and all of those things. So all of that stems back to, and that's why it was so important for me to include that in the film.
I love the fact that you put in that Sally said it, and that you captured it when she was telling me. She said that you know that you have the right to be in the world.
Hmm.
And when I heard that, I just was like, oh, that's that was really that was a great.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny, my I had a bad connection for a second.
I did
Hopefully, I'm
too.
not. um, there are some other things too that I think people get surprised at. We actually share the Cherokee old tradition, and as well, because we're like descendants from you guys.
I think it's the other
Um,
way around. We
oh
descend
yeah.
from you guys, yeah.
I know we're related somewhere.
Yeah, we are. That's why our languages are similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but about putting the man's belongings out the door, when the guy was talking about how, there wasn't a whole lot of abuse because the women held everything, and then like you acting up, not being any good, they just like put your stuff out.
Yeah.
How does it been, um what has been the reaction, like, as different people have seen it? I don't know how many have seen it so far, but have you had reactions from non-native people who find this very surprising? Are they very
Yeah.
shocked by all this info?
Yeah. A lot of them are really surprised. And I think like we forget, like that's pretty recent history, like 100 years ago that European women didn't have any rights. That's not very long ago. Yeah, we kind of forget that, we're all liberated and we're all working women and we're all doing this, but you just step back a little bit and that's what you see, yeah.
Mm,
So yeah, a lot of people are surprised by it, and then that's why we made sure we included it in there because I think people tend to forget, where they come from.
do you think do you think that how do you think that this is the or what do you think are some different ways, like, you're doing it through your film and your education and all, but do you think that people are kind of starting to wake up to the fact that Native history is American history? Or does it still feel like, or do we still feel, does it still feel hidden to you, like, on your day to day? Or does it feel like it's opening?
I think this is one way to help uncover some of that hidden history, but definitely there's a lot more work to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I know when I was a youngster in school, anything that I heard about Native people was never good, if I heard it at all.
Mm.
Like I would hear things like it would sound like we were the outsiders in the story. It didn't sound like, it didn't say, oh, the Native people were here and then settlers came in. It kind of sounded the opposite, like we were in the way of the settlers. That's the way the history was told from that perspective. And it's so important to include all of the perspectives and all of the people in history. It's so important,
Mhm.
especially now with what's going on with the social climate, to be able to understand and be able to appreciate each other's cultures. And when you're not telling everybody's history, it makes things harder.
Yeah. Did you, when you were attending these events, what was that like for you? Like, there's Gloria Steinem, there's all these people, like,
Yeah.
how, I mean, it must have been wonderful to be a fly on the wall with that. What was it like behind the scenes with everybody?
Oh, they were
How was
super cool. They're like rock stars, Sally and Louise, they go to this event and everybody's following them around after and wanting to talk to them. And yeah, so it was kind of cool to just be in the background, like capturing it all. But there's super funny ladies. Like in the film, I'm showing more of their serious side, but they're friends, and some of the stuff I caught on camera that didn't go into the film was pretty hilarious. Like some of the conversations that they had. It's nice to be a fly on the wall.
what you said you've known them for a long time, Mary and Louise.
Mhm.
Are you also, are you in a different group or different clan from her?
From Louise?
Yeah.
Or you cut out for a minute. No,
Oh,
Louise is Bear Clan and I'm Bear Clan too. So
oh,
she's
so you're
she's
both.
one of my clan mothers. Yeah. So and we're from the same community. She lives just up the road from me, like 5 minutes away. And our kids went to the Freedom School together, the Mohawk Immersion School. We go to ceremonies together where we both worked in the rites of passage ceremony for like I think it's 17 years now. So we're
Wow.
very close. Yeah, we do hang out a lot.
I
She's
have a
very
feeling she's
dynamic.
gonna star in more of your films.
Yeah, she was in Under the Husk too. Because she shines in the community. She's one of the ones that are really active in women, like empowering women and youth, and giving them cultural teachings. And
Hmm.
yeah, she's very dynamic.
Is there anything that ended up on the cutting room floor that you would like to tell us about? I'm always curious what happens with the cutting room floor.
I don't know. We had so many different versions. Like it's crazy when you're doing documentary film work how much your film changes over the last probably the last 4 or 5 months before it was finished.
Mm.
Moving scenes around was one of the things that things kept getting moving around. I'm trying to think of one of the things that I actually had like I had Katja on board, and then she had two other filmmakers that were given advice on how to film as well. So at one point there was I think 4 or 5 non-indigenous women and me, like looking at the
Oh,
cut and trying to decide. So I at one point, I was one of the things that they thought early on was that I should cut out Pete Jemison and let it just be all women's voices. And I
oh
was like,
wow.
absolutely not. I said we were not about just the women in our society. It was about equality and a balance between the men and the women, and that was so important for me to show that. We never wanted to be feminists because we didn't have to be.
Hmm.
We were equal with the men, and we had the respect of the men. So I thought that was really important to have his voice in there. So that was one of the things that was interesting and dynamic. I mean, I really appreciated all their feedback, but I really had to stand my ground on
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 that
some
one.
things.
We have a question here about what you might be interested in exploring as a director in future film work. Is there something you're already percolating on?
There's something that's percolating now, but I don't know if it's going to come to fruition yet. And it's another thing with Louise. So Louise is right now like we're really concerned about the environment and all the things that are happening. Like as Indigenous people, like watching what's going on with the earth, it's very concerning. And she's one of the things that she's trying to do is to try to get together a lot of the Indigenous women to ceremony and to pray for answers, I guess, on the environment and
Yeah.
what we can do. So that's something that she's been talking about lately. And as soon as she said it, it started tinging in my head, like ting ting ting. That you feel like okay, I might have to go in that direction, but we'll see what happens.
Did Louise or Sally or anyone the people that were actually in the film did you show them ahead of time the scenes or what you're working on or copies of it and kind of get their input on it, or was it just like surprise, here it is?
I showed it to them when I was almost done because
Mm,
I knew it was continuously changing, so I didn't want to like show them something and then they're gonna expect it to look like that. So I did a
yeah.
private viewing with them when it was almost finished, and Sally cried when she seen it, and they were both very emotional to watch it. Yeah, it was pretty cool just to watch them watching the film.
That moment with Louise when Sally was telling her before they went out, where she was saying 500 people are about to know that you're that well, really, that women's rights or that didn't start with in
Seneca Falls.
Seneca Falls,
Yeah,
and Louise gets choked up there, and uh, I think an Indigenous person, that moment was very significant for me because I kept feeling like, yeah, that's how it feels. It's like all of a sudden I'm kind of sharing that feeling of being seen with
hmm
them, and so I definitely felt like your film where you're speaking both to Native people and non-Native people when we were watching this. And
yeah, yeah,
did that were you kind of
yeah. I kind of as a director, and I really wanted to speak to both audiences. I mean, for our people here, and especially for our young people, I really want to share stories that are truthful and empowering to them. I mean, there's so many sad stories out there. There's so many negative stories about things in the past, and I touch a little bit about on like boarding schools and stuff like that in the film, but I don't want to live there. I want
yeah,
to share the things that they don't see that are positive about them, and they're so important. Like the Haudenosaunee contributing democracy,
Yeah.
ideas of democracy came from our people, and all children should know that everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
same with the women's, the influence on the women's rights is something that should be common knowledge. And I'm hoping that through this film and through Sally's book, the work that's being done, that, by the time I'm gone, that it will be common knowledge.
Mm-hmm. You said that you had found out from Sally about all of this before. That's where you learned it. Kind of with Louise at the beginning, where she was saying, "I wish I knew what my grandmothers were doing and thinking." You know, the
Hmm.
War of 1812 and all that. They miss, and now you're on the process, and you're in that spot, and you've got these women around you. But did you learn anything else? What else did you gain from making the film?
I always gain a lot every time I make it, and it's such a hard process to do it. I always think of it like having a baby, like you're going through all of this, and it gets, especially when you get towards the end, it gets so hard right before, the thing is ready to come out. And then after you're done, you're like, okay, what's the next one? Yeah. So that's kind of what the process reminds me of. But I always learn a lot as I'm going through from the people that are in the film, and there's so many things that don't make it in the film that you get to experience, with the people that are in the film. So there was a lot
Mhm.
that I seen that didn't make it in there.
What did your kids think about it when when they saw it? Or
Well,
that mom's at it again. Look what she
yeah,
did.
yeah, they see me, sitting here working away on, with my editor. We're doing with the COVID, we were doing most of our work through Skype. So she'd send me a cut, I'd watch it. I was going back and forth, back and forth. They'd see me on conference calls with my producers, and I don't know. So they seen all that work that went into it, and they loved it. Like they watched it with me when it premiered at Woods Hole Film Festival.
Hmm.
So I had my daughter and Soji, who's a good friend of mine, who was an associate producer in the film, and my sister. We were here watching it, and then my other daughter was watching it at her house. And my other daughter, so and then we all kind of talked about it after. But yeah, they really liked it.
Are you guys doing all right up there during this time with the pandemic? Because we're Tahlequah is kind of struggling right now, and I'm in Manhattan, but
Yeah.
how are things up there?
Our community is like really comes together when things happen like that. Like our community comes together to support each other. We've been lucky; we haven't had any cases around our community lately. We did have some in the summer, um, but yeah, we've been keeping pretty close,
Vigilant.
pretty vigilant. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I know that they wanted us to also talk a little bit about the Sisters Rising film as well, and I know those filmmakers aren't here tonight to talk about it themselves. There are a lot of nations represented there, and so I thought maybe you and I could talk about what it was like for us to watch it, because I'm sure it's kind of different for us. Some of it is like, yeah, we know, and then um, did you? What did you think about the film, and how has this been to be kind of having both of these kind of basically hidden stories kind of up next to one another for you? Like,
I think it's a very important story for people to know about, and it does relate to my film, too, because in my film, it we see the Haudenosaunee women and how domestic violence wasn't a thing. It was like pretty much unheard of. And then today, like in 2020, in my community of Akwesasne, we have, I think, three different domestic violence programs in my community. So from a people that had no domestic violence to now having, to deal with that because of colonialism, and so it hits every community.
mhm. Yeah, I think that I have to agree. I think my husband laughs at me because when I'm watching one of these things or listening to something, I say "yep" a lot. Somebody
Hmm.
would be talking, I'll go "yep,
Hmm.
yep, yep," and he
Yeah.
starts to
Yeah.
laugh at me about it. But I think something I think what I'm finding that I hope that people get from watching Sisters Rising and watching yours is also faces of uh, women and Native people who are really doing something. They're really active to in a positive way to help these issues. Like you've got um, these just strong people,
Mm-hmm.
I would say, coming in with a heart for their community.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was very encouraging for me
Yeah.
watching it.
Yeah, really courageous women, and we have them here in my community of Akwesasne too. I can think of Howie Thomas. She works for the police here, and she is such an advocate for women. If you're trying to do harm to a woman, you better watch out if she's around. And then we have the people that work at the Three Sisters program that are supporting women that need help. So we're fortunate to be able to have those women and men. There's men that support too. Um, and I hope for that for other communities. I'm not sure other communities are so fortunate.
Yeah, I know that there's some. I heard there was a few years back that there's a small community in California um, that only had 25 members left in their community, and there was a domestic murder situation. They lost 4 members.
Oh my God.
So it's uh it's kind of when in Sisters Rising, there's like now her name just went out of my mind just now, but when she was saying that sometimes we feel like you're on the endangered species list, and we need to be put on that and protected.
It's true. It's true. I
Yeah.
mean, even in our community, I just passed by up the road, there was a sign for a woman. It had her name. I think it was Francine. I just seen it today.
Mm,
Um, Mitchell, I think. And it had her picture and it was on this big poster and it said unsolved homicide. So this was like, so there's things in the community here that like we've had unsolved
mhm.
homicides in our own community.
Like you said earlier, Phil, we still have a lot of work to do.
Hmm. Yeah, we do.
One of the things that the martial artist in the film, the Lakota martial artist, she was saying that the more we can have a chance to tell our stories, the more we heal as Native people.
Hmm.
And I think the work, this documentarians like yourself catching those things are so important, because the minute I hear that, I thought, yeah, when I'm doing my work, I need to make sure that I am expressing these things for my own self.
Hmm.
Like I took a moment to think about the places where I've been a little too afraid to speak or to say things.
Yeah.
And I know with the Me Too movement, everybody was like, oh, and I just couldn't do that. I don't know. I was very quiet. I think, I don't know, maybe that is something that maybe a lot of Indigenous women share.
I think that's something everybody needs to work on. I mean, I've had that
Yeah.
in my own personal experience where people will try to just sweep things under the rug, and keep it silent, you know,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
doesn't help anything.
Well, I'm glad that you're doing your work so we can see other
Well,
people doing their work.
yeah,
And
we
that
all have
way
to,
it keeps everybody moving. And
yeah. I mean, even I am like that, and some of the, like when I'm doing filmmaking, there's some things that are like hard to talk about.
yeah.
So,
I was also, I have to say, I did take a moment where I was like, okay, who are the people who made this film? And like, are there Native people also behind the film making. And
mhm,
I was actually very happy to see all the support that the filmmakers had from the Native community to get the story out there.
mhm,
And so I kind of noticed in that as the filmmakers, but also in your film where there's been some nice portrayals of allies, of how we can help one another. And I was expecting this question, and we got it,
mhm,
which was how could white people better educate themselves on Indigenous history? And what can white people do to uplift the voices and presence?
mhm.
And so You want to give that a go?
Wow, that's a huge question.
It's such a huge question, right?
Well, one of the things is when you're reading resources on us, try to look for native authors is important. Not that non-native authors don't sometimes do a good job, because sometimes there are some good books, but it's good to get it from, the source it from the people whose history it is. And the same with the films too. It's good to have a indigenous person telling the story. And it's funny because I've been on a few Zoom calls for other festivals, and there'll be other indigenous films in the same block as me, and sometimes I'm the only indigenous filmmaker there. Like, it's non-indigenous people telling indigenous stories, so it's important that we're the ones behind the camera and telling the story. And you can support filmmakers, and you can support people that are doing this kind of work as allies. I mean, I had people from, not even indigenous people. Like, if you look on my little GoFundMe thing at the end of my movie, it was both that were supporting me on the film.
It's such a big question, and I get these kinds of questions a lot for in many ways, and um, I I thought it was just nice to just see it in action in the films itself, like watching Sally and Louise, their relationship, and um, yeah, I think it's really about relationships. So even
Mhm.
though I get asked this question all the time,
Yeah.
I appreciate the question because it
Mhm.
gives us an opportunity. Um, but I think it really is about relationships. I think sometimes we just think they think we're so far, or like,
Yeah.
and we're all here, and you had so many supporters, like you said, on the GoFundMe,
Yeah.
and it's really not that hard. I just say that they should reach out and search and look,
The
like
other
just
thing
like you were
too
saying.
the other thing too to think about is like you did that land acknowledgement when we started, and it's so important to remember, like, where you're sitting right now, wherever you are, like, whose indigenous land are you on? And
Hmm.
what can you learn about the indigenous people that are there? Are they still there? Did they get blazed across the country? Are they, like,
Yeah,
what happened to them? And there's usually resources around where you live too. Like, where I live, we have our cultural center here, and a lot of times there's those kind of opportunities to, like, right around where you live. Like New York City,
what's
if you're in
your
New York City, you can go to the National Museum of the American Indian, or the American
yeah
Indian Community House, or visit with some cool natives, because there's a lot of them in New York City. So yeah.
yeah, I really love the museums that a lot of our communities have, these little cultural centers and museums.
Hmm.
They really, the culture keepers are just, the work that they do is fabulous to
Yeah.
just keep things going, and
Yeah, I agree. And I do agree with you too on relationships. I mean, that's why I chose Sally and Louise to tell this story, because it's kind of mirroring what happened with before, like with our women and the European women. So you see a modern version of that in the story. Still learning from each other.
mm. Did you have like was there any little piece of history that you weren't able to put in that you had hoped for, that was like something on the timeline that you didn't quite get a chance to put in?
Yeah. Just the topic of the other movie is one of the things that I really wanted to include in my film, talking about, because I found it so ironic that as we were empowering the European American women to fight for their rights and to gain their rights, while that was happening, colonialism was happening to us, and our rights are going the other way.
Right.
And so that was one of the things I wanted to address. And I think I got it a little bit. And the other thing was just how, how now we have domestic violence in our communities, and we didn't have that before. And that's something I didn't really have time to fold in. I would have liked
Hmm.
to have included that too.
And then now you had you had Sisters Rising put next to you. Did that? feel like, okay, good, it was discussed.
Yeah. Well, I worked on a piece for Me Too with that
Mm.
Rematriation magazine. We did a half-hour piece on Me Too where we did different people having a discussion, so that was something we had worked on a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was such a powerful mission there about focusing on healing and the empowerment of Native women through sharing their stories and successes.
Hmm.
Such a, I, we could just put so much of that, so much more of Native storytelling out there and allowing Native voices out there. I feel it really would be very healing to us as Americans.
Hmm. And it's like that series I did for Rematriation magazine. We have it edited, and we're working on the color correction and sound design.
Oh,
But we did, I think half of them were Haudenosaunee women, and then
mhm.
half were somewhere like we did Patricia Michaels from New Mexico, Joanne Shenandoah, singer-songwriter from here,
Nice.
Santi Smith, choreographer, Louise, Louise Hearn, um, Delana Otherbull doing work on domestic violence. So we did a bunch of different women, but there are so many women, Native women out there that are doing courageous and empowering things. So
Yeah.
many. So it was even hard to decide which ones we wanted to do because there were so many. So it's important that those stories get told because social justice movements, all the things that are going on, a lot of times it's the Native women that are in charge of those things. Like you look at Standing Rock and all the
Hmm.
movements that are going on, who's in charge? The Native women.
Um, I only have one last thing I wanted to ask you is you are a very proud auntie.
Hmm.
And I I think you even have it on your LinkedIn. It's like your job title as auntie.
Yeah.
um, how do you would you like to tell us a little bit the about how the role of elders and aunties play in our storytelling and in our the films and our stories? How, like, at least I know from myself and from other Indigenous storytellers I know, like, we wouldn't even imagine erasing the elders out of that communication or telling our stories. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that in your work and why that's kind of important as a
I,
whole for.
I think like the elders' voice is always so important, and not only the ones that are living, but our ancestors that have gone on. I mean, I know when I was doing my last film, Under the Husk, a lot of times the youth that were out fasting, they're doing their fasting with no food and no water by themselves. They would talk about being visited by their elders, people that have passed on. And I was trying to figure out how do I show that in the film, and I ended up doing it through narration, like the having an elder speak, and then that was the voice of the ancestors, so I was able to include it that way. And then for this film, Without a Whisper, I really felt like I had them with me while I was making this film. I really felt like all the things that went in the film were what was supposed to be in the film. Like I really felt guided in the process. And I think like for us, like if we want to honor our ancestors, we really need to honor ourselves and honor our
Mm.
stories because we're in a place right now where we can do things. We're not, we're getting out of the survival mode and we're moving past that. A lot of our ancestors were had to just survive, and we're lucky for what we have because of what they had to sacrifice for us. So it's up to us to pick that up and to move forward and, you know, in that way.
Well, this has been just an absolute pleasure hanging out with you, talking story a bit, learning about your process. Of course, now I'm going to be up checking your Vimeo every once in a while and seeing what you're up to. When does the thing come out for the what was it, the rematriation? When is that
I would think
exist in the
by the
world.
end of the year that'll be out. But there's I think rematriation.com. You can get on to check out the magazine, the online magazine, and they have Facebook
Mhm.
and also Instagram. I also have Facebook and Instagram for both of my films, so you can check those out. And I have websites for both of them as well. So it'd be cool if people like purchase these for the schools and start sharing those stories. So all of these films are important.
Excellent. When does Without a Whisper go on PBS?
November 2nd was the date that I had. It's not, I don't know if it's
Nice.
set in stone, but that's what they told me. So early
Nice.
November, I'll say for sure.
Well, thank you so very much for joining us, and thank you, Joanne and Catherine and Sean and Sarah and everybody who hosted us tonight. And um, gonna wrap us up, I guess. Is there? I'm just checking the chat to see was there anything, any last anything I don't see. I think we're all pretty good. Um, but I just wish you just the absolute best. I hope to meet you someday in person and uh, and see more of what you're up to later. And
Thanks. It was
and
nice to talk to you, and thanks to the Boston Women's Film Festival for having the film. It's so important to get it out there. This went
thank
by
you.
so fast. We're just like gabbing away.
Boom, boom, boom. That's how it is.
But
All
thanks.
right. Well, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And we hope that you were able to learn a little bit more about Native storytelling and a little bit more about all the good things that Indigenous people are doing there out in the world. And we hope that you enjoy the film if you haven't seen it already and you're sneak peeking, and that you will enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks. See you guys.
Bye.